All right, welcome in to Carp's Corner once again. As we sit here after some Major League Baseball Hall of Fame inductions were announced and who the new entrant will be. We'll get into that a little bit. You'll rarely hear me talk about baseball on this program, by the way, but it does happen from time to time. You'll break down some of the news of the day, quarterbacks potentially on the move, big time ones. And are they moving even on, leaving the NFL, or could there just be a destination for him somewhere else, or do they ultimately decide to return? Big news of a coach who decided to move on, one of the most successful over the last 16 years and the second longest tenured head coach in the NFL, only to Bill Belichick. Where's Sean Payton will be going? Some news out of Michigan again. I know that we keep harping on Jim Harbaugh, but he seems like the most logical and potentially only college football head coach that could be a fit in the NFL. And so with 9 jobs open in the NFL, where could he potentially be going? And could there be some signals on his staff that he might ultimately be leaving as well? So I wanted to start off the Major League Baseball piece. It's something that's been all over, my goodness, all over social media. It's been all over television, all over everywhere. And this is really, I think, like the only time where people really start diving into baseball, unless you're heavily invested in your regional market. But David Ortiz gets inducted into Hall of Fame, sliding over the 75% threshold. And you know what? Good for David Ortiz. He's a really nice guy, big-time postseason player. Did a tremendous job helping the Red Sox break their curse, leading them to a number of their championships. And so for people who are my age, like, it was a big piece of watching him help that Red Sox team finally break through and win the World Series title, and then helping lead them to a couple more as well. Huge, big time clutch performer in the playoffs and in the World Series. Should be commended for that. Very good player in the regular season as well. Yeah, I think he's a Hall of Famer. I don't think he's the most deserving guy in the world. I don't know if he, was a guy that you'd put it on the first ballot, but given the parlance of our times and the era he played in, he gets in first. But he's Big Papi. He's a nice guy. And so here's the thing. Being a nice guy, that shouldn't be a prerequisite for getting the Hall of Fame. There's guys 100 years ago that, bad human beings. By today's standard, they were racist. There were a lot of things that happened. They were drunks. They were womanizers, spousal abusers, all of these different things. They're imperfect humans. But they're all in the Hall of Fame. They got in. And because why? They're on-field exploits. And that's what they should ultimately be judged on. And so on the passing here of their 10th opportunity, you got Barry Bonds getting passed over. Roger Clemens getting passed over. Sammy Sosa, he's not getting in either. Him and McGuire. You have Kurt Schilling. He apparently, this was his last, didn't get in as well. And so I want to focus on Bonds and McGuire because these guys, or Bonds and Schilling, or Bonds and Clemens at first, because those guys I think were Hall of Famers before any of the allegations of steroids. And this is the problem that bothers me about the Writers Association. And yes, they've tried to turn it over, but there's still a lot of the old guard in there. The old guard are the ones that continually voted them down because they like to memorialize baseball, the nostalgia, all these things that they think it was pure about what it was when they were growing up. They don't realize it was just as flawed then as it is now. And all the changes that have happened with different eras in the dead ball era. And now they had the rosin era where, the spin rate was so ridiculous. No one could hit home runs anymore. You couldn't hit pitchers. So they came out and they made a rule and they changed it. But in the 90s, steroids became prevalent. A lot of players used them. A lot of guys who maybe we think didn't use them did. And I go back to this and people, push back at Freer and everything with the Major League Baseball Players Association, how powerful they were, and they didn't want testing. I always refer to this. My dad played in the NFL in the 70s and 80s. They enacted drug testing. Why? Because he's like, I didn't want to play against guys that were using steroids. I didn't want to compete against them, and I didn't want to compete for my contract dollars against them. And so if there were that many players in Major League Baseball who weren't using, they should have stood up and should have said no and should have had testing. The writers should have dug in and said, hey, How is Barry Bonds gaining 25, 30, 40 pounds later in his career? How is Mark McGwire getting so big? How are all these guys, Aaron Boone, all these guys are blowing up, or Brett Boone, they're blowing up at this point in time, hitting 40 and 50 home runs. Guys are in 60s, 70s. No one's talking about it. How is it happening? Advancements in the human body? No. The writers knew. The owners knew. Bud Selig knew. Everybody did. And so the saying in coaching is if you're permitting it, you're promoting it. And not only were the writers permitting it, they were enriching themselves off of it. They were writing books on it. They were glorifying how, the McGwire and Sosa chase saved the game. Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, in my opinion, they were steroid users, or they were Hall of Famers before the use of steroids. And then people will say, well, they tarnished their legacy because they decided to cheat. Well, if no one was going to step in and change the rules and make sure that you can officiate it properly, well, then you know what? Their natural response was, hey, if you can't beat them, join them. I was one of the great players before. I'm getting left in the dust. I want to make sure I can earn the most revenue I can during my playing career. I want to maximize that. I want to maximize my numbers. And so I get it. I understand why they did it. And now a lot of the older baseball writers, it's not the younger ones, guys like Jeff Passan, they get it. I think even Buster Olney gets it. These guys waited 10 years. These guys are still want to be the moral arbiters of the game and come out and act like, well, David Ortiz, who, by the way, did test positive for performance enhancing drugs. Now, all of a sudden they come out like, whoa, well, hey, there were some false tests that could have happened. And it was before the testing period. Bond's positive test was before the testing period. He had other things that happened, but a lot of this stuff happened during the anonymous testing and other things like that. David Ortiz was on that. There were other guys who were linked in that who were in the Hall of Fame. And so Frank Thomas comes out. He was as vehemently against as anybody because I don't think the Big Hurt used juice. We'll never know, but I would venture to guess. I'd have to bet my life's worth on it. I would have to say that he did. And he's been vehemently against any of those guys, but he's like, we're putting other guys in now. You might as well put in Bonds, put in Clemens. These guys are deserving. They were great players. And so Major League Baseball, they not only permitted it, but then they took it and they realized it was saving the game. And so they have their whole marketing thing. Chicks dig the long ball. And so I'm not here to tell you, because the argument back on the other side is, well, listen, just because everybody else is doing it doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean you should. Yeah, that's true. But that's coming from like the parents' perspective. But if the parents are sitting there endorsing your behavior and then wondering why you're acting that way, well, you know what? This is what it is. So I've thrown my hands up at this. I'm basically done with Major League Baseball. I'll watch the playoffs, but it doesn't excite me anymore. And it's because of, their unwillingness to change and their, gripping on to history like grim death and failure to evolve. It's just brutal. It's just brutal. And nothing was more evident than with the last Hall of Fame inductee vote. And the writers, they get their wish. They get to sit there and some of those guys and pound their chest and act like they've never done anything wrong, even when they tacitly endorsed what was happening. And maybe even more so than that, because they're writing books on it and they were monetizing it, monetizing the use of steroids in baseball. So you tell me, who is more to blame? The players who are doing it, they're enriching themselves, or the writers who are promoting it and also glorifying it while monetizing it for themselves? Hopefully one day, a lot of those writers will all be off and it'll go to the Veterans Committee and those guys will get in, but it's not the traditional method. And I hope that, those guys thumb their noses and say, yeah, you guys can put us in. It's about, the Hall of Fame is about the history of the game. The plaques that you put up there, they should encompass everything. The good, the bad, how they got there, the suspicions, the era that they played under. That is what history is all about. And that is what should have been in there. And those guys should have gotten voted in. And Curt Schilling, by the way, and this is how baseball writers hold grudges and grind axes for years. Curt Schilling was one of the best postseason pitchers of all time. He was part of those Red Sox teams that broke the curse that ultimately got that title. He pitched, I believe he got 3 wins in a 7-game World Series with the Diamondbacks. he was able to come in and do some amazing things. Him and Randy Johnson won that thing for him. He's not getting in. Because of steroid allegations? No. Because he says some crazy things on Twitter. Maybe he has political views that some people see him as extreme. Maybe the writers disagree with. That's not for me or you to decide. I don't care about any of that. I don't care if his political views are the same or completely polar opposite of mine. I watched Curt Schilling. I thought Curt Schilling's a Hall of Famer. And he didn't get in. And why? Because people don't like what he's done. And, some of his post-career stuff isn't great. Some of the things he said, and, got kicked off TV and all these other things. And that is holding him out of the Hall of Fame. It's perplexing. It's befuddling. You've seen it happen in the NFL with Chris Carter. Like, you see it happen with, some of the voting, the MVP stuff with Aaron Rodgers, who we'll get to here in a minute. That's all I'm going to spend on baseball, because it's truly, truly perplexing to me how America's pastime lost their way by holding on to things like that. Tom Brady, what's he going to do? For years, we speculated on Tom Brady's retirement. Max Kellerman said about 3 Super Bowls ago that Tom Brady would become a bum in short order. Well, Tom Brady didn't, and he's played, and he's looked as good as ever, led the NFL in passing. He's part of a phenomenal team, close to having probably the second greatest comeback that I've ever seen in the playoffs. And yeah, you can throw the Houston Oilers and the Buffalo Bills in there from back in the day as well. But down 28-3, comes back in the Super Bowl. 27-3, comes back. And if it wasn't for Matt Stafford and Cooper Kupp, probably would be advancing potentially to the NFC Championship game. But after every season, you'd always hear Tom, and you hear him talk about accomplishments. People would ask him, winning the Super Bowl, what does it mean? What does it mean winning your second back-to-back? What does it mean winning the MVP, having this historic career, all this time with Belichick, all of these things? And he always said the same answer. Reflection is for when you're done. Nostalgia, when I'm done someday, I'll sit back and look at this and I'll reflect on everything. In the moment, Tom's here to grind. I played with Tom briefly. Guy works as hard as anybody, maybe harder. And as you get older, you have to put more and more work in, physical energy, emotional energy, to keep your body sharp, your mind sharp, to make sure that you're able to go out and perform at the highest level. It's tough. It's physically demanding. And when you're in your 40s, my goodness, I can't even imagine how hard that would be. Well, for the first time afterwards, we listened to Tom Brady talk about after the season, sit down and talk about the decision of playing with his family. Talk about what that means, how he, is been playing for a long time, and he has to figure out what's fair to them. On his podcast, dropping references about, Kobe Bryant. You never know when's your last play. You never know when's your last day. You want to make sure you can enjoy some of that, enjoy the time you have left. That sounds like a guy who's being heavily reflective and heavily nostalgic. It's widely known Giselle wants him to be done. He said she cringes with every hit. He's got all the money in the world. He's won 7 Super Bowls. He's achieved more than any quarterback, any player in the NFL ever has. The thing that Tom's wrestling with is still was great. He knows there's still a little more in the tank physically. It takes a lot to get there, but does he still have it emotionally? Does he want to sit back ultimately and reflect, about being a dad? And, talk about that with his kids. Does he want to miss even more of his kids' practices? He'll miss stuff with his wife. People don't realize this. During football season, you don't get Thanksgiving. Not really trick or treat with your kids. You can't have Halloween parties. You don't get, a chance, to go to Christmas parties, have that Thanksgiving dinner, the way that you like to sit around and have a cocktail, watch football. Because you're playing in it or you're practicing. There's no Christmas Day with the kids and being able to enjoy it. Yeah, maybe you get a little sliver. You get, an hour or two to have Thanksgiving. Maybe your coach lets you wake up in the morning with your family and come in and practice in the afternoon. But it's still not the whole experience. There's no New Year's Eve, parties and time to reflect and enjoy your family and enjoy your wife. Bringing his family into the equation, talking about being satisfied. I think the Man in the Arena series this year I think that was him kind of signaling the end. The Bucs are in a bad spot trying to be able to bring everybody back again. They're not going to be able to do it. And as sad as I am to see Tom go, like, I'm happy for him to be able to continue his life. He has given so much to the game. I'm pretty sure that he's done. And maybe he surprises all of us by coming back. But listening to him talk, this is the first time I've ever heard him been reflective and nostalgic at a time when he's making a decision about his future. And he always said before, the only time to be reflective and to be nostalgic is when you're done. So he'll take some time. I think he's going to talk about it. But for my money, I would say Tom Brady's gone, unless he wants to have one final tour on a goodbye show. And I don't see that being Tom Brady's style. He's not coming back just to tip his cap and go around and give that final year. That's not what Tom Brady's ever been about. And I can't imagine him changing that this late into life. Said he wanted to play to 45. Well, he's knocking on the door and he's achieved it. Tom, thank you very much if you are done, because I've appreciated playing against you, playing with you, and then ultimately watching you on both ends before I played and ultimately after, because gosh, he's been doing it for a heck of a long time. Now, with that, another quarterback on the move, potentially Aaron Rodgers, goes on Pat McAfee's show, talks about it all the time. Every Tuesday, his off day, very candid, breaks down everything. I got to listen, as Aaron Rodgers is probably going to win the NFL MVP. Max Kellerman sits here and says, well, I'd rather have Justin Herbert than Aaron Rodgers. That doesn't even make sense to me. It doesn't even resonate. Okay, you're talking about one guy who is wildly accomplished, very successful in the regular season, has won a Super Bowl, and has had playoff success, has been to numerous NFC championship games. Just because he hasn't gotten over the hump more than once, it doesn't make him bad. That's happened to a lot of guys. It's happened to a ton of players of being able to struggle. You look at Drew Brees, his playoff record is better than Drew Brees's with won Super Bowls. You know, it's hard. We compare him to Tom Brady. That's fool's gold. His contemporary. He's the gold standard of athletes everywhere. And so Aaron Rodgers has been great. Just hasn't achieved that. And that's fine. And there's still time. His book isn't yet written. And so Aaron sits down and talks very candidly. And this is something I also think is true, where said some people he thinks were cheering against him this year, waiting for him to lose and to fail, just so they could be able to get out the slings and the arrows and throw them back at him. Why? Well, because maybe the preseason stuff, because he said some things during COVID that people didn't like, because he wasn't vaccinated. Used the term immunized, felt like he lied to you, as if this is like a spouse or a parent lying to you, someone you love and trust. He didn't lie. He misled. He knew what he was doing, obviously. But people have been waiting for this to jump on it and to make this point. And I believe that that's partly true. Aaron believes it, and I think it is as well. And so is Aaron back in Green Bay? It'll be tough. It'll be really hard. They've got some cap issues. It'll be hard to bring back that same team. You know, where could he potentially go? We'll get into that later. I would like to think that he'd stay in the NFC because it's an easier path if you look at how great some of these young AFC quarterbacks are. But I do know this, and this makes perfectly logical sense. You know, Devontae Adams' contract's up. I think him and Aaron are both back in Green Bay, or they're both gone from Green Bay. I can't see a scenario where Aaron returns without Devontae, or Devontae returns to Green Bay without Aaron. And so either they get that thing figured out for Aaron and find a contract for Devontae, or Aaron's going and Devontae's going. And maybe Aaron's going to go anyway. And if he leaves, well, Devontae's leaving, because I don't think he wants to stick around for the Jordan Love era. So all of those things are going to be interesting to see, because Aaron said he wanted to make this decision, you know, before the start of free agency, to really give his buddy Devontae Adams a heads up. I give him credit for that. People want to talk about how can people like him in the NFL. His teammates love him. He's given a dude a heads up, and it's really for the franchise as well. And I think him and Brian Gutekunst have mended fences. And so he wants to do that beforehand and before free agency to give them the heads up. And hopefully they can get something worked out with Devontae Adams. I think he probably wants to stay if they believe they can keep it all together and get it moving in the right direction once again. interesting to watch to see where that goes. Sean Payton probably has meant as much to the city of New Orleans as any athlete they've ever had in Louisiana. He didn't play, he was a coach. But in 2006, fresh off of Katrina, a team that was practicing in San Antonio, drifting around, heck, in Dallas that year, we played them in Shreveport during the preseason, a city and region that was decimated. They brought in a guy off the scrap heap in Drew Brees, who had just had his shoulder pieced together after just getting it shredded right at the end of the season the year before. And together, those guys built a winner, from the rubble in New Orleans. And they ultimately brought the city a championship, a Super Bowl crown, something they never had. For that, Sean Payton's beloved. 16 years he dedicated down there. He loves the region. He loves the people. His legacy said he wanted to be someone who coached with passion. Well, he did it the right way. And you know what? Despite Bounty Gate and everything else, Sean Payton was pretty much universally loved by a lot of his players. I enjoyed playing against him. He was a great offensive schemist, as good as anyone. I'm talking Andy Reid, McVay, Shanahan, all these guys. I played against some of them. He's as good as anyone at finding matchups and taking advantage of people. But New Orleans is in a terrible cap situation. They've got a great team, but will they be able to keep it together? And they don't have a quarterback. So you've got all the pieces except the main one, and you're going to have a hard time getting one given your salary cap situation. So that's the deal that they're battling right now in New Orleans. And I completely get it and understand it. I think Sean's probably burnt out a little bit. Maybe takes a year off, does some TV. But this is the most important thing of note. People have connected him to the Dallas Cowboys. He's not going to Dallas this year. I would be very surprised if that happens. I think he takes a year off. But what that does, that puts Mike McCarthy on notice today. You better have that team in the NFC Championship. You probably better get him to the Super Bowl, or this is your last year in Dallas. Because Jerry Jones and the affinity and the friendship that him and Sean Payton have, it's known. He was there with Bill Parcells. They've flirted before. I think he's always been the apple of Jerry's eye. And if he can get him, he will. So I think Sean's probably saying, hey, pump the brakes, give me a year off. Let's refresh. Let me recharge the batteries, do a little TV, get into this. If you need me in the future, I'll be around. Mike McCarthy on notice. I think you're safe for this year because the fact that his job came up, that Sean's available now, possibly in 2023, I think that saved Mike McCarthy in 2022 because they're not going to hire a guy to potentially fire him and bring in Sean. But like I said, it gives you 1 year to get this thing done. 1 year. And so we'll see. Things turn around. And he might have to do it without Dan Quinn, as he might be getting another job with New York or whoever knows where he could land, as he's one of the hot coaching commodities that you're going to find. Jim Harbaugh gets a lot of action on here on this program. Head coach to the Michigan Wolverines, but lost his defensive line coach to USC, his defensive coordinator, who helped craft this great defense this year that slowed down Ohio State, Aiden Hutchinson, David Ajabo, probably 2 first-round picks off the edge, had it all going. In his first year on the job, came over from Baltimore. Well, his brother loaned him to him for a year. He needs a defensive coordinator. Mike McDonald going to the Ravens. Now, he may have gone there anyway, and some coaches may have left anyways, regardless of whether Jim's staying or going. But I don't think you can underestimate the impact this has. And maybe it's not a signal that Jim's going to leave, but I think Jim looking at this thinking, hey, it definitely might be the right time to jump ship now, given the fact that I just lost the guy that turned around my defense. Spent all this time trying to get it right. He gets it right. And ultimately now he departs. And so with Mike McDonald heading back to the Ravens, could this really be the signal that Jim Harbaugh is leaving, or could this signal to Jim Harbaugh, if there was any ambiguity, any uncertainty, then now it's time to go? If one of these jobs is offered, I'm jumping on this thing. People are speculating on it. I think it's pretty likely. A couple of weeks, the Super Bowl will be done. We'll see all these coaching hires. 9 of them are open. You got the Bears, you got the Raiders linked to Harbaugh. I don't potentially see him going anywhere else, but who knows at this point? Those are the two most likely places. And his coordinator, Mike McDonald, heading back to his brother, obviously doesn't necessarily help his case to be at Michigan long-term. We do have games this weekend. We've got the Bengals at the Chiefs. Line floating around about minus a touchdown for the Chiefs, 6.5. You can see it's 7.5. It floats around a little bit, different places. 49ers taking on the Rams out in LA. It's going to be the late game, minus 3.5. Bengals Chiefs. It's interesting because they just played about a month ago. Week 17, Burrow leads a massive comeback, 450 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Shepherds them down on the goal line. People are saying Zach Taylor botched the game. They ultimately win it. That helps them win the AFC North Division, get the crown, get the home game, and now they're in the AFC Championship. In that game, Mahomes wasn't bad. About 260 through the air, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Not very good in the second half. But it was in Cincinnati. And so this game is ultimately now going to be in Kansas City, and the change of venue will matter. Younger teams don't play as well on the road. It's a fact. Cincinnati's a pretty young team. Now, maybe they overcome that and they're able to rise above it. But Kansas City, now their 4th straight home AFC Championship game. Keep in mind, Joe Burrow was sacked 4 times against Kansas City the first time. He was sacked 9 times against Tennessee last week. If you look at this Kansas City pass rush, you got Chris Jones. I mean, he's going to put pressure up on the middle. He can be a terror. You got Melvin Ingram had a sack last week coming off the edge, playing real nasty. Did a great job harassing Josh Allen. Very athletic. Can Cincinnati protect Joe Burrow? He can get it done. Boyd, Higgins, Chase, you got Mixon, Uzama, tight end. They have the weapons he needs, but can they protect? Been very, very touch and go. I don't think they're going to be able to do it. I like this game being closer than the number. Joe Burrow's got a lot of fight. I just don't know if he has enough fight to get over the hump. That's the problem. Pat Mahomes, he plays really well in these games usually. He does a terrific job. He played phenomenal last week against Josh Allen. Saw what he was able to get done. Can Cincinnati slow him down? Can they pressure him? Can they keep him contained? They did a pretty good job in the second half in that week 17 matchup. But Andy Reid is a heck of a coach offensively. Him and Bieniemy will scheme something up. I just think this game gets a little bit away from Cincinnati. They're ahead of schedule in their development. Joe Burrow has done a fantastic job for them. They're on their way to being great. Maybe they buck the odds. Maybe they get it done. I just think it's working a little bit against them. That Kansas City offense last week against the Bills, we finally saw that thing click because every time they had to answer the bell late, they did. Now, Buffalo made it easy on them with the 13 seconds and how they played it. As easy as you can make it, I guess, given that situation. But this offense is looking to click. Defensively, I think Joe Burrow will be able to move the football. Just the pressure, the sacks, I eventually think that'll be too much for him to overcome, unfortunately. I think it's tighter than the number, inside of 7. I'd like to see Cincinnati win. I would love to see them get back to the Super Bowl. The irony would be this would be their 3rd appearance, and it could be the 3rd one against the same team, the San Francisco 49ers, if they were to pull it out. Brings us to the second game of the night. The prime time game, you've got the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Los Angeles Rams. Rams favored by about a field goal, maybe 3.5, depending on where you're looking at. FanDuel's got it at 3.5. And so we'll work off of that, for this argument. You got Stafford and Jimmy G. You're giving the check mark to Matt Stafford. You look around at the rest of the rosters, probably giving the check mark for the offense, the receiving core, probably to the Rams. Defensively, probably going to give the check mark to the Niners. Interestingly enough, it's going to come down to me for these defensive lines. You look at the defensive line, Armstead, Bosa, all these guys that they have and they've had over there at San Francisco for a number of years getting after the quarterback. They're fantastic. And they did a great job of it, last week. That defense ultimately took over the game late against Aaron Rodgers. and the special teams did a fantastic job. And Jimmy Garoppolo just did enough. But you look at what Von Miller, what Floyd, what Aaron Donald were able to do and pressure Tom Brady. Von Miller came up with a huge strip sack that was overshadowed because of the snap over Stafford's head when he wasn't paying attention the next play. But these guys can get after the quarterback. And if you're going to be able to beat San Francisco, you got to get them behind the chains. You can't let them stay on track offensively. Get that stretch zone going. They're going to have Deebo Samuel moving all around, slot, wide, in the backfield, running the ball, catching the ball, running the F post. Like, they're going to have a plan for him. Can they get that done? Raheem Morris, he's done a pretty good job this year. This defense appears to be gelling. I think they can slow them down enough. And Jimmy G, seems like in every big game, and he made the plays in that final drive for the field goal. Had a nice pass to Deebo Samuel to pick up some yards. I don't know if he's going to be able to do it. I wouldn't trust him. I would trust Matt Stafford more. And I know people have hammered on Matt Stafford. He has proven in this playoff run what he is made of. And you saw it answering the bell against Tom Brady. I think he answers the bell again this week. I like the Rams going back to their second Super Bowl in 5 years. Favored by 3.5. Tight. I don't like that hook. I really don't, because I could see this very easily being a 3-point game. I'll lay it and not feel great about it. But it just seems like Jimmy G in this game, it'll be the time he'll throw the inopportune interception, overthrow, whether it's an open Kittle, an open Samuel, an open Ayuk, whoever it might be, he'll sail one, and you'll just be like, gosh, that was the play. That was the play they need to make. Against the Chiefs with Emmanuel Sanders. Heck, he sailed one over to Ayuk a couple weeks ago, against Dallas. You thought that might, end up being the difference. But he's made plays last week, but they didn't ask him to do a lot. I don't know if against an offense like this with Odell Beckham Jr. and Cooper Kupp, by the way, who's receiving ridiculous praise from everyone because of how well he's playing this year. I don't know if you can play a game and protect your quarterback when you're going to have Matt Stafford slinging the football all over the field. Lay the points. I think it's ultimately the Rams. I think it's the Chiefs. I'd love to see a Rams and a Bengals Super Bowl. I don't think that will occur, but hey, I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. I'd love to be wrong on this one. That's all for Carp's Corner this weekend. Get juiced up. Enjoy the games on Sunday. It's the last time we'll have 2 NFL games for the next 6 months. We just have the Pro Bowl, have the Super Bowl, and then a long time off. But there's draft, there's the combine, there's free agency. There's so much to get into. As always, thanks for listening to Carp's Corner. We'll talk to you soon.